We are just getting started, finally live here on the end of session, spring session town hall, and also a little bit of a farewell on my end. Everyone, thanks for joining me, State Senator Cristina Pacione-Zayas for the 20th Senate District. I wanted to make sure that I had one last town hall before I make the transition to City Hall. We've got a lot of information for you tonight that we want to share out in terms of what we've done in Springfield over the session. And we also have a little bit of kind of next steps, so what you all can expect as I transition out, and the next opportunity presents itself for the 20th district. I understand that we have some folks that are joining us via the Zoom, and we're also on Facebook. And so I'm going to go ahead and say a few words. Si alguien necesita interpretación en español, por favor, escoge el globo. Y ahí en la pantalla, en la mano derecha, hay un globo que dice interpretación, y van a seguir escuchando la presentación en español. So I'm going to share my screen so we can get right into the various updates I need to present to you all. Please, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, your connection to the 20th Senate District. We always want to know who's joining us and how we can make sure that we have you logged in and understand what your connections are. I'm going to move us along to the next piece here. Okay, so just wanted to say we have passed the fiscal year 24 budget. As of, it was a late night last Friday, actually in Saturday morning, about 3 a.m. is when, the House wrapped up. We had wrapped up the night or morning of before another 1 a.m. session, but happy to announce and just share that both houses have passed the budget, and it's on its way to the governor's desk for signing. Really pleased with a lot of the investments as it relates to areas that I have been championing since office, of course, in the early care and education space. And I think, this is going to position us very well for the goal of setting up Illinois to be the best state to raise young children. So here's some highlights, particularly around wanting to make sure that you all know in the early childhood space what's happening. So Smart Start Illinois is an initiative that was proposed by the governor during the budget address back in February. It is a part of a larger plan that will span a course of 4 years that will get close to about $1 billion in investments in the early care and education space. But this first year, we are investing about $250 million in total. What you'll notice in this investment is that there is a significant investment in our child care workforce compensation contracts. So what this particular aspect of the investment is doing is finally moving away from a vouchering system for child care providers, which often puts them in this precarious state around having to have a consistent enrollment to get a reimbursement per child. We know that, enrollment fluctuates. And there are instances where you're not able to send your child to childcare, and therefore, the childcare provider cannot get paid. But what this does is actually front load or set it up in a contractual basis where a childcare provider says, this is the cost of caring for X amount of children. These are my, categories of expenses. And this really sets up more predictability with how we fund childcare through the child care assistance program. Plus, it incentivizes an increase in wages for child care providers so that we can have a floor of about $17 to $19 an hour. Granted, it's nowhere near a living wage, and we need to do a lot better. And hopefully, there'll be more opportunities to continue to raise those wages. But it is an improvement from the current $13 to $15 an hour across our state for child care providers. Early intervention programs. So that amount right there is actually inclusive of an increase. There was an increase in early intervention, which is the special education services for children 0 to 3 who present with developmental delays. And we were able to increase by $40 million. This is like unheard of. And this was really a significant and unprecedented increase, particularly because over the years, we've either had flat funding or we have restored. We had a small cut, but we wanted to make sure that we were really doubling down on our investments in early intervention there, because there have obviously, been disruptions in in-person learning. There have been obviously a lot of the implications with the pandemic. Therefore, there have been more eyes now on young children and their development now that they're back in care, and the need for early intervention is absolutely necessary. The Illinois State Board of Education administers our state preschool program, and the early childhood block grant is going to have an increase of 75 million. And the objective there is to open up about 5,000 more slots that'll over time, over the course of this Smart Start investment plan, will have about 20,000 slots in which they're working towards. There is also some capital funds that will go towards brick and mortar extensions of existing facilities or building new ones. And so this is for providers. They will compete for these funds. And then the Child Care Assistance Program, again, to account for, we have now codified, this was one of the bills, or actually in the budget implementation bill, we codified the floor for the child care assistance program. On the early childhood education tip, as you can see here, comprehensive strategy and plan that was introduced by the governor back in February with the budget address. Smart Start Illinois is what it's called. This year, there's about $250 million going towards these investments that cover the whole birth to 5 spectrum, plus also take care of our workforce, which you'll notice here, there was a significant investment in our child care workforce compensation contracts. This is going to be a different way that we pay our child care providers. Instead of paying them in arrears and having to justify their enrollment and based on real-time enrollment, there's actually now going to be an opportunity for them to present. Here's the cost of caring for X amount of children. Here are my subcategories of spending. And what these contracts can also do is raise the floor for the wages that early childhood providers that are specifically being paid through the child care assistance program can earn. It is somewhere a range of $17 to $19, but we know that's not a living wage in many parts of our state, and especially if you're raising children. But it is an increase from the like $13 to $15 range that is currently in place. You'll also notice here the early intervention program. This is our special kind of the special education element is the Part C of the IDEA, which is our legislation around, or our statute around providing special education services for children 0 to 3. This is an unprecedented increase of $40 million. Has never been done before, and especially helpful because it has been something that over time we have only funded at a flat level. In some cases, we've had a small cut. So this is really going to help increase wages for our early interventionists, as well as increase our caseload, because we have a lot more children on wait list due to the pandemic and not having access, and also more eyes on children and recognizing the need to mitigate any kind of developmental delays or disabilities. Illinois State Board of Education provides our state-funded preschool, as well as our infant toddler publicly funded classrooms and home visiting programs. And so there's a $75 million increase there. The goal is that it will result in about 5,000 more slots, and it will be over time, 20,000 new preschool slots, and that is really an effort to eliminate preschool deserts. You also have the capital grants that will be made available to early childhood providers to be able to extend existing facilities or build new ones. And then also an increase to the child care assistance program that will allow additional families to come into the CCAP program. And we were able to also codify the floor at 225% of the federal poverty line, which is roughly about $50,000 for a family of three. Let's move on to the next slide, which covers our K-12 investments as well as our higher education investments. What you'll see here is that the evidence-based funding formula is getting an additional $350 million. This was something, just to give a little bit of background in history. 2017, state of Illinois finally decided to address its inequitable funding mechanism and way that we sent resources to the school districts. Each school district receives federal funds, it receives state funds, and then they make up the gap for the cost of education through local funds, mainly generated from property taxes. And so what would happen is that our higher property wealth school districts were able to meet that gap and in most cases exceed it, and our lower property wealth geographies could not do that. And therefore, we had incredibly inequitable model. And so what the objective is that this particular legislation back in 2017 said that if we increased funding by $350 million each year by 2027, we will be able to close those gaps. We're a little bit off. We have been, for the most part, increasing funding every single year, with the exception of one during the pandemic and at the very, very beginning. But we definitely are going to probably have to revisit this after 2027 to get closer to that adequacy mark for all of our school districts. You'll also notice there is $45 million going towards a pilot for teacher vacancies. We know that there's been quite a few issues with obviously filling vacancies in very specific areas, such as bilingual education and special education in certain STEM areas, certain grade levels. And so what this fund is going to do is that for 170 school districts that compose about the majority of our vacancies, about 2,800 specifically, they will be able to, there is a formula that will result in a discrete amount going to the school district to be utilized to support filling vacancies. That can come in the form of sign-on bonuses, that can come in the form of pipeline programs. But the idea is that we wanted to emphasize the importance of local control and, school districts locally designing the ways in which they address their vacancy issue. There was also funding for Youth Build, as well as, I'm really pleased, $14 million for the Parent Mentor Program, the statewide Parent Mentor Program that provides very critical assistance to school teachers that need additional support in the classroom for small group instruction, for students who are learning English, for students with individualized education plans. That $14 million will allow I want to say we're up to like about 1,200 parent mentors across the state. They'll allow for some expansion as well as some increase in the stipend amount that parent mentors receive. They provide over 100 hours of service throughout a school year. And they receive a stipend of about like $1,000 per semester. What you'll notice in higher education, MAP grant funding, another $100 million there. And now with that amount, essentially any individual who meets a particular economic threshold will be able to access MAP grants to meet their higher education goals. So that was a goal of the state to finally, make higher education obviously affordable, but most importantly, accessible. Our public universities and community colleges will continue to get some, significant resources because, again, over the years, they had experienced quite a few cuts. So $100 million going directly to them for their general operations. And there's also within those funds to public universities and community colleges, it will help support and subsidize the cost of textbooks and scholarship programs, as well as teacher pipeline initiatives there. So let's move to the next slide. So wanted to highlight the ways that we have been investing in communities in the FY24 budget. So you'll see $350 million towards homelessness prevention, affordable housing, and outreach. This is known as Home Illinois. And stay tuned, there is going to be in the next couple weeks, the governor is going to be hosting, an event in which more will be explained about how that is going to look across the state. I do know that at least 16 million is coming directly to the city of Chicago in the first kind of round to assist with case management and resettlement and wraparound supports and services for the existing unhoused population we have in Chicago. But there'll be more details on that. There is also economic development for the governor to have some funds to be able to close deals, attract businesses and jobs to our state. That's $400 million going towards that. There is this amazing Illinois grocery initiative to expand access to nutrition deserts, and to communities that do not have access to grocery stores or fresh foods or healthy choices. And so 20 million will be granted out to specific communities that have experienced these kinds of deserts. There's also expanded workforce development programs and careers and technical education pilots. I'm really pleased. One of them that I had co-sponsored around STEM and having particular workforce pipeline. And I want to say that the investment there is a few $1 million coming from DCEO to provide those types of supports. There is forgivable loans to launch more of our social equity cannabis business and tune of $40 million. And then there's also a one-stop business portal to foster entrepreneurship within our state and support our small businesses with those, with the technical assistance and being able to navigate all of the various funding opportunities. Let's go to the next slide. Health and Human Services, you can see here quite a bit, $75 million for DCFS specifically to cover staffing and some scholarships for our youth who are in care, as well as our facilities improvement. There, you may have heard there was a blueprint that was introduced. I want to say this was like back in April on children's behavioral health transformation. And this is an initiative to really look at all of our needs around mental and behavioral health for young people and young children, all the way from the age 0 to 24, from, the most kind of acute needs as well as to the broader universal needs. And so that blueprint, if you look it up and just do a search on Google, like Blueprint Illinois Mental and Behavioral Health, it is incredibly comprehensive and looking at like all of the different initiatives across the state, how we can optimize, synchronize, and really, meet the moment. As we know, mental and behavioral health is a top priority, particularly for young folks. There was also a rate increase for our home workers who assist our older adults in the community program that DHS administers. Reimagine Public Safety. You may have heard me talk about this. This was a piece of legislation that was passed a couple years ago, and there's been $250 million assigned to it in essentially 15 communities in Chicago and 22 communities 22 communities in Chicago, 15 communities outside of Chicago would be competing for grants specifically around violence prevention, street outreach and intervention, youth leadership development and employment. And each of these communities would have a roundtable of community stakeholders that would help design a comprehensive strategy to address the root causes of violence and obviously the resources needed to be able to carry that out. You will also see $53.5 million for IDPH for disease monitoring, because I think what we learned for sure in the pandemic is that our infrastructure with IDPH had, been eroded over time and pretty weak. And therefore we needed to make some significant investments so that we could be more proactive instead of reactive. And then of course, the strain of the pandemic on our already, challenged system revealed some additional areas that we have to invest in. $500 million towards our, with both state and federal funds to support our state's healthcare system. $240 million specifically to support the individuals, who care for our fellow Illinoisans with developmental disabilities. We're getting closer and closer to what most people in the field know as the Guidehouse Study recommendation for an hourly wage. I think we were able to increase that hourly to $2.50. $8 million for home delivered meals for our older adults. You all know it as Meals on Wheels. 75.5 million going towards our safety net hospitals, and the workforce needed in the 20th district up until the new map. Community First was a safety net hospital that was within district boundaries, but for sure a lot of our constituents had accessed it. And obviously we felt a lot of the pinch during the pandemic because of the lack of resources. So we are continuing to invest in our safety nets to support their sustainability, because it is, obviously the primary point of entry and care for folks with limited economic resources. Let's go to the next slide. So here's what happened in terms of the bills. I wanted to make sure I finished what I started this session. I was able to get 16 bills over the finish line, and really proud of the work that I was able to do with my colleagues in the Senate as well as the House, because as y'all know, it takes at least 30 votes in the Senate and 60 in the House. And you need a partner in the other chamber to quarterback the bills that you send over, and the same for you to receive the bills that they send over. And so what you see my scoreboard there. I usually like to, kind of track and monitor bills as they're in motion and update that scoreboard wherever they're at, so that I've always got this kind of check in of progress in terms of what's happened. So really proud of some of the bills. Just to highlight a few, we had a few task forces that I want to lift up. One is the Healing Centered Task Force, and this came out of a resolution as well as a partnership with the Lieutenant Governor, where, we have so many different initiatives across the state that really are, trying to address trauma, whether we use the language of trauma informed or trauma trauma-based, healing-centered engagement. What that really tries to do is make it more ambitious and flip it on its head. The work that we do around trauma is not just naming trauma, understanding trauma. That's part of it. But then how do we create models, practices, language, definitions, and policy that really kind of streamlines a lot of this work, so that we're not working in silos, we're being more integrated, and therefore, of course, can achieve the impact. So that's one of the task forces that'll work on creating those common definitions and language, and make recommendations for policy and practice across the various agencies that take up this issue. The other task force I want to shout out is the Land Trust Task Force. And this actually came out of one of our roundtables, our housing policy roundtable. And this came out of the work that had been happening and led through a coalition that included Here to Stay, which is our community land trust here in Chicago. That essentially, works on stabilizing communities by acquiring properties that either are donated or purchased. But the idea is that the community land trust owns the actual land, and then is able to retain a household in the physical home. That home is what the mortgage is made out of, and the land is retained by the land trust for 99 years. And basically what it does is it allows a more affordable transfer of property versus the market rate. And so what this task force is going to do is look at how might we, because there's about 4 community land trusts in the state, how might we continue to expand this tool and put this in our toolkit, or our toolbox for affordable housing. I also want to just, highlight a couple others. And of course, you're going to see a lot of, education related stuff, right? So on the early childhood tip, the Department of Human Services home visiting, these are, again, critical early childhood interventions where you have home visitors such as nurses and individuals in the early childhood space who visit families who are either pregnant or parenting all the way up to age 5 to support their ability to parent, their child's development, and supporting that holistically to prevent abuse and neglect. So we codified that. We had been running these programs for 30 years. We never had it in statute. The only reason why it existed is because we put money towards it. And especially with this big investment with Smart Start, it's incredibly important that we codify these types of programs so that they can live beyond, the leadership that's currently in place. PUNS. The PUNS is a list that the state creates for young people who present with developmental delays and disabilities that are pretty acute, that may require some support services after they have graduated from high school. And so the state provides these services, but there's a list that exists that families need to, 1, know about, and 2, get their child on if their child is eligible, so that when they graduate, the services can be available. Well, apparently there had not been a very widespread effort to make sure that families are aware of this particular resource. And, this bill too came from a constituent that had that instance where, she was in her child's school and somebody told her about the PUNS list. And she said, wow, I never would have known it if somebody didn't just randomly talk to me about it. So we're making sure that in the annual meetings, when a child has an individualized education plan, that the family knows the process for signing up for the PUNS list, and that there is a person in the school that's trained in that process. So really pleased, that was a constituent-driven bill, as well as the genealogy fee. This was a constituent-driven bill. So folks who are looking for records for the purposes of genealogy, reducing those fees so that that information is more accessible, and obviously government transparency. Another one I want to highlight on the education tip are teacher licensure omnibus. And so this, again, is trying to address vacancy issues and encourage alternative pathways so that we can get more folks within the education space. Our sustainable community schools, that was helping to elaborate and codify the definition of a community school, which is a school that is able to extend its walls into the community and its hours well past the school day on the weekends to really be a hub for community learning and a hub for action. I used to be a community schools director. I can totally attest to the power of when a school anchors a community. And so the objective here is to codify that so that we can eventually get some additional resources from the state to expand community schools throughout the state. And then the last piece, I'm really proud of this one, is the guaranteed income exemption. And so there are some guaranteed income programs where you have, and Cook County has a pilot for 2 years where a discrete amount of families will receive a $500 cash transfer that they can do whatever they want with for 24 months, no strings attached. These are pilots that have happened all over the country, in fact, all over the world, and have been able to demonstrate that when families have cash, they make really responsible decisions and get themselves set up on a more sustainable pathway for economic independence. And what we wanted to do was make sure that if you have access to a guaranteed income cash transfer, it's not going to compromise any other benefits that you receive, such as, publicly funded health benefits or, for example, the Child Care Assistance Program. So it wouldn't be counted towards your income. So let's go to the next slide. A few more bills that I carried for my House partners. And some of these I started in the Senate, but because we had what we call companion bills, we wanted to make sure we didn't want to duplicate efforts. So we went ahead and went with just one vehicle and carried it all the way through. A couple of them that really have to do with labor and that I'm proud of: freelance worker protection. So if you're a gig worker or a contractual worker, this would make sure that you wouldn't have wage theft or, have to take reduced wages. This is ensuring you have a contract, that the terms of the contract are clear, and that you have some rights if you need to raise issues about your payment and there couldn't be retaliation. And it sets forth some guidance about, when wages are reclaimed. In some cases, you might be able to get double the amount if somebody was not not coming through on their portion of the contract as a contractor. Salary transparency. Finally, we are able to, for employers of 15 employees or more, if they are posting a job announcement, then they need to include the salary range and the related benefits. And this is going to go into effect in January 2025. This is meant to, one, address inequities in terms of, payment for different folks who have experienced issues around discrimination or lesser pay, even though there is, an Equal Pay Act. This, I think, makes it more transparent, but it's also efficient. Like, nobody wants to waste their time, in interviewing for a position only to find out it's not something that they would have considered because of the price point, and also a waste of time for the employers. So let's just put all this stuff out there. And then I also want to lift up couple things around inclusion. So the Illinois Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, ICJA, the board, there's 25 members on that board, and 6 of the members are members of public, but now we have made it so that 2 of those members need to have had previous experience having been incarcerated. This is, again, one of those kinds of pieces of legislation that, I'm a firm believer. The people closest to the problems are the ones who usually have the best solutions. And especially if you have gone through the Department of Corrections, or you have, had some type of contact with the criminal legal system, you should be at that table helping to design solutions around that. So that particular bill I'm really proud of. Another inclusive piece is about gender appropriate care and insurance coverage. We made the language in our insurance code gender inclusive versus gender specific, meaning that it used to be that it stated if you were a man, you could have a prostate, you can have a prostate screening covered in insurance. But it was presumed, that if, for example, you're transgender, you don't identify as a man, but maybe the sex you were born with, the gender you were born with, you would need a prostate screening. Your insurance wouldn't cover it. And so now this is more inclusive so that you can get the life saving screenings available to you, irrespective of how you identify as gender, and making sure that your insurance can cover it. And it also afforded some additional coverage if you are predisposed to some chronic diseases, to be able to have that type of coverage and insurance. Another one I'm really, really, really proud of is the Native American Ancestral Remains Act. And so this is finally doing some reparations work around burial grounds here in the state of Illinois, and ensuring that we are working, we are kind of recentering power in the way that we find ancestral remains that are connected to various tribal nations that have cultural connections to Illinois. And so it calls for creating a table in which we have representatives from the various tribal nations that have connections to Illinois to tell the state of Illinois how to handle ancestral remains that may be discovered over time, and also to create a state paid for space to appropriately handle ancestral remains. This was a bill that was kind of building on a relationship that has been forged over time with the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. So really proud of that bill. Higher education in prison reporting. I was a part of this task force around higher education in prison, how to make it more accessible, more effective. And so we finally have taken some of the recommendations from that task force and codified them, such as, making sure that we have accurate data so we can fully understand the scope and the ways in which we can better fund access to higher education while in prison, so that people can be better positioned for reentry once they have served their time. And then, there are some, there's a call for a dual language report. The Illinois Advisory Committee on Bilingual Education. Dual language models have become increasingly
more popular, but also, there's a ton of evidence that when you do cultivate a second language, using the home language as the base, you do actually see much better outcomes academically, of course, socially, emotionally, cognitively. And so this report would be able to lay out those opportunities and ways that we can expand. So let's move on to the next slide. And just wanted to, thank you all for the opportunity to serve you in the 20th Senate District for the past, I think it's only been 29 months. I was appointed in December 2020 in the midst of the pandemic and, dove right in, got straight to work. And, over these 29 months have been really working diligently, deliberately on, developing the model of co-governance, working in a way that brings policy and government directly to the constituents that I represent, and also leaning into your collective wisdom and talent. I'm just really, honored to have had this opportunity to serve you in all the different ways that we've worked together, whether it was through the policy roundtables, whether it was through our community events and initiative, whether it's through these town halls and making sure that everything I'm up to in Springfield and helping to demystify the public policy making process, and ultimately partner with you. And then also through the various ways that we've brought in resources through capital and through programs, doing our special town halls on cannabis or, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. Ultimately, it has been truly a pleasure and an honor to represent you in Springfield. And I am really excited that I'm going to be now able to represent you in the city of Chicago, specifically on the 5th floor. I am preparing to resign so that I can fully devote my attention to serving as Mayor Brandon Johnson's first deputy chief of staff. I am looking forward to engaging you in that particular capacity, bringing some of the learnings that I've had here about how to make government more accessible and more effective. And so I really thank you all for the opportunity to be your senator, but now I get to be your representative on the 5th floor. The district office will remain intact. Staff will be there. My resignation will trigger an appointment process in which the committee people who have been elected to represent the 20th Senate District, which is essentially, it's composed of 11 committee people, because that's how many wards are within the 20th Senate District. And each committee person has what we call a weighted vote based on the number of Democratic votes that I received back in November. It then tells you how much of a weight each person's vote has. So it's not a one person, one vote situation. And essentially the votes have to amount to 50% plus one. There will be a calling of a meeting by the individual who has the most votes that I earned during the November election. They will put out a call for people to submit resumes and their interest to serve as the state senator for the 20th district. And they will host a meeting in which folks will present themselves. And then there will be a public voting process of who will be appointed to fill out the rest of this 103rd General Assembly. The term that I was serving was a 4-year term, so it will trigger a special election whenever there's more than 24 months left in a term. It does trigger a special election. So this appointment process will be, once it's concluded, that person will serve up until the next General Assembly in January 2025. And then, but in the meantime, it will trigger the process for the special election, which coincides with the presidential election. So starting in September of this year, so just in a few short months, folks will be able to circulate petitions to get on the ballot, for the primary, which will take place in March of 24. And then whoever advances in that primary will then be able to run in the general election in November of 2024. So you can still call the office, and all staff will be there ready to assist with constituent services or any other questions that you may have. You can still text the office, and I think that one of our slides had that information up there. And then you can also visit the district office. Particularly, we've been doing a lot of work around new arrivals, so that we were collecting donations. I think we're on pause right now with that because our office is looking like a whole warehouse. But once again, I just want to thank everybody for this opportunity. It has truly been a pleasure. It has been an honor. Oh, thank you, Graciela. We're still accepting donations. It truly has been, an honor to serve you all, and I look forward to, delivering the goods at the city level. And I'll continue to work with my colleagues in the General Assembly. Thankful that I'll be able to leverage those relationships and support them. But it has really just been a beautiful experience, and you all have made that possible. So thank you once again. I'm not going anywhere. I'm still going to be, I will be a constituent of this next state senator, but I'm looking forward to partnering with you all in City Hall. So everyone, thanks for tuning in tonight. Have a great evening. And I will hopefully be seeing you all soon around the neighborhood and various community events. If there's any questions, there's a couple minutes. Thank you all for all the beautiful comments. Appreciate. Feel free to take yourself off mute if you're in the Zoom. And otherwise, I will, like I said, I'll see you around, and just looking to wrap up a few more days before I officially resign. So have a good evening, and thanks for spending it with me tonight.